Welcome back to another episode of the New Future Podcast. I'm your host, Luis Duque, and I have Katelyn here with me. We'll be talking about her experience with her Mentor Dino business that you're doing, obviously your career as well. If you can give us just a quick introduction on kind of what Mentor Dino is, your career, and a brief overview, that'll be great to get us started.
Yeah, Louis, thanks so much for having me today. So my name's Katelyn Rossier. I am an architect in Pittsburgh, Pennsylvania. I have roughly 10 years of experience outside of school and mainly in corporate higher education, healthcare type of architecture. So I've kind of jumped around a bit between the different project types, but really those complex projects where there's different systems besides just architecture and engineering, there's people systems as well that move throughout the space. And through those projects, I really found a passion for the people side of architecture, not only the people that move through our spaces and interact with it, but our teams as well. It takes an army to put together a building of architects, engineers, contractors, owners, everybody. And really, when those teams are in harmony, it really is where the magic happens. But I've also been on the other side where there wasn't that harmony going through a project. It can create a lot of tension and stress and anxiety throughout the process as well. So I'm still an architect and doing that full time. But Mentor Dino really spawned from noticing all these gaps within the profession, not just for architects, but engineers, designers, contractors. And so trying to build resources that can help elevate the entire profession by not only fostering something that is collaborative and safe, but building up those foundations that we may not have learned in school. We may be fantastic at the technical side, but then sometimes those people management or human skills tend to lack, or we don't know how to communicate to different types of people. I would say architecture is like learning a whole nother language, and we have to learn how to communicate that different language to people that may not understand it. And so we got to bring up the whole profession to really get us going in a fast paced, fun environment again.
Yeah, so you started Mentor Dino just kind of as a maybe like a side project, but I think it's turned into something probably bigger than that. What has been like the biggest surprise as you started architecture, wanted to do something kind of on your own on the side, and what has been like the biggest surprise of that little part of your career, if you think of that as part of your career?
Yeah. So I'll step back a little bit prior to Mentor Dino to help give a little bit of more context. So I actually started blogging on and off, like I think it was probably 6 years prior to Mentor Dino starting. And that was after dealing with a very tough project where being a young female on a construction site, issues, people leaving the job, and a very contentious environment where I almost left the profession entirely. And so that blogging on and off, it was it was fun, but it never really gave that extra oomph that I knew the profession needed. And plus, we get busy, so sometimes things kind of got put to the wayside. So that's why I say I was blogging on and off. And it wasn't until after I actually got a career coach because I was severely burned out at one point and having them kind of reset where I was and rethinking kind of what I can do with my career. And I don't have to be defined as just an architect. I can have a multifaceted career. Um, that's when I started to pivot to what else can I create and put together. And when I was blogging, it was called Mentor Architect. And I had to rebrand it because in the state of Pennsylvania, I would have had to make it a professional LLC because they would have assumed I was providing architectural services. And not wanting to go down that route for anybody who started their own business, that is a little bit more financing and legal stuff to deal with, just wanting a simple LLC, I decided to rebrand. And that's where Mentor Dino came in. I was, you know, talking to friends, just like brainstorming, like I need a different name that makes sense. And we ended up down this road of an acronym because it's really hard to come together and put a company name when company names have been around forever. So there's a lot of names that are taken, and I've learned why architects and engineers tend to have their name in their business. So Mentor Dino started with the acronym Mentoring Designers Innovating New Opportunities. And then, as soon as I said dino, then a little dinosaur image popped up. And as any architect starts, the closest thing I had was napkins, which is just ironic. So started napkin sketching to create the little dinosaur logo. And it was just a way to put everything together. I'd already been building up the training courses. So I provide training courses in Revit and professional development. And it was kind of pulling it all together and then, reframing some of it for a dinosaur rather than just my face. But it launched in early 2023. And I kicked it off with redoing my Pittsburgh Equity and Architecture Survey. I did it in 2019 because the AIA does their own survey, so the American Institute of Architects. But it can either be very expensive to have access to it, or I learned you can go to your local AIA office to get a glimpse, but it's a very intense survey, so people tend to not make it all the way through. So there's a lot of data gaps. And when you do look at the overall, they bundle Pittsburgh with Philadelphia and New York City, which for anybody on the East knows that Pittsburgh does not have the cost of living of New York and Philly. Um, so it started off in 2019. I thought I would do that again in 2023, which was kind of a great pre and post COVID analysis and understanding how many people changed jobs, what kind of work environments we're in now, beyond just the salary benefits that it goes through. So that kind of kicked everything off and just been doing little things. I presented at 2 conferences, one of which I was invited to present, which was fantastic. I've never been asked to present something before besides project work and things like that. But it built into being guests on many podcasts. I haven't quite bit the bullet on people telling me to go teach. That's another whole time commitment. But starting my own podcast, talking to people, I've had firms provide me with fantastic information and just being open and honest with what struggles are they dealing with in their firm, how can I help, and just what can I create going into this next year. And then, as you know, started my podcast side in the end of 2023. So that last quarter, which at the beginning of the year, I never would have thought I would have been a guest on a podcast, letting alone starting my own. So it was kind of a wild adventure for year one. And now we're starting off on year two.
Yeah, and I think, like we said at the end, just the opportunities that having something, a presence, if you will, online, even if it's sharing stories and sharing everything on LinkedIn and even um, as a podcast or a blog or website or something, just the amount of opportunities that that brings alone, I think is worth it the time. And I think we were talking about this when I was talking interviewing for your podcast, which we'll link below, but just doing it, I'm not doing it for the money. I'm not doing it to be famous or anything. I just enjoy talking with people and enjoy having the opportunities that has brought just connecting with other engineers, connecting with people outside engineering, and overall just kind of develop myself into a better engineer overall. I think just recording and talking about all of these has increased my communication skills, my people skills, and overall I think that's a big plus of just having something online. And like you said, there's opportunities. I haven't been invited to conferences as well, and I'm actually going to be going to the Steel slash Structures Congress this year, and they are basically paying for most of the trip because I've been doing podcasts. I connected with them. I'll probably be doing some recording over there as well. But overall, it just brings a lot of great opportunities, and I'm just blown away by how many people just kind of cares about what you're doing. So that's always amazing. Let's
Yeah.
talk. Go ahead.
No, you're good.
I was just gonna say, like, how has Mentor Dino kind of impact your career as an architect?
It's it's taught me a lot because I teach professional development training. I'm Also constantly learning. There's no person that is a master of professional development. It's something we always need to be working on, just as much as our technical skills or learning a new project type. I compare it to a lot of having like a dominant hand when you're writing and sketching. So I'm right hand dominant, so very good with a mouse. I can sketch, I can draw straight lines without a ruler with my right, but the second you put something in my left, I'm not as strong. And that's what I compare the professional development side
Mhm.
of our skills. We just haven't used it as much and we haven't been trained. It's not as valued in school and higher education. It's there's building up your technical knowledge inside. So I am equally learning and I am it's probably the most books I've read and listened to in the years. My family and everybody that knows me knows I'm not a reader and writer, which makes it very ironic that I was doing blogging and other things and just diving in and trying to create those cross systems that build in those soft skills that are coming from professionals and researchers that aren't architects and engineers. So they don't really understand our side of the profession, and I can be that connecting block. So I'm constantly reading the resources to see what synergies I can pull together or tweak the example to make it more relatable. So that's just been kind of the fun stuff I've been learning and what I've been building.
Yeah. So, and with that, I think it's also important to highlight that I think the beauty of kind of what you're doing as well is you're not only talking with architects, you're talking with engineers, you're talking with
Mhm.
um, other careers, other professions, which I think has a lot of benefit to your own career because you need to coordinate with engineers, you need to coordinate with construction, depending on kind of what type of architect whoever's listening to this is, or engineer for that matter. And I think that just talking and communicating in that sense, I've interviewed. I'm a civil engineer, specializing in structures, but I've interviewed mechanical engineers, aerospace engineers, and understanding kind of what they do and how they do it. I think has a lot of potential in terms of what it can do for your career at the end of the day. Um, to me, there is obviously a benefit of having those conversations. Um, but like you were saying, it's all about like learning and having that open mind to understanding what other people are doing. Um, with
Yeah, and
mentor,
if you learn more about what others do,
yeah,
because I said it takes a village to put together a building, and I think architects need to get away from just being around architects all the time
mhm,
because then they forget everybody else that they need to coordinate with and communicate with. And so it's if you understand how a mechanical engineer goes through his process or her process of all the calcs, then I know when the owner makes a change, what kind of information I need to give them, in what type of manner, how fast. But it's also an opportunity for the engineers to learn a little bit what architects do because we kind of even with AI and pushing that we can render faster, then now clients are wanting renderings when we are in really early phases. And then when you put that in with BIM, like not all the lights and the ducts are in the same spot for where it needs to be for design iterations. So it creates this process of movement and how different people need to move that isn't always in sync with each other and how to communicate. And communication is key to the built environment and relationships as well. And if you're not fostering those relationships and understanding, it can be really hard just to kind of put everything together, or you end up redoing a bunch of work.
mhm,
And from the business side, that's time is money because a lot of fees are put together by billable hours. So if you're constantly redoing work and having to fix things, it hurts the firm's bottom line, which is already way too tight, in my opinion. But that's a whole nother conversation.
yeah, and I think something that was coming to mind as you were kind of talking about that is just the opportunity to cross collaborate as well. And I think architects are, I will say, generally pretty creative and obviously have an eye for design and everything. Engineers are definitely not on that side of the spectrum. So I can imagine having a podcast for you and a blog and everything, where is not like super creative, but it requires a little bit of outside of the box thinking in terms of I'm not just crunching numbers into a calculator or sketching something. How has that affected the way you see your work? Because I know for me as an engineer, I'm always I was always of the mindset of, hey, I have a problem. I'm just gonna tackle it. I'm just gonna follow these steps. But as you start doing a little more creative work, you start using other parts of your brain. You start thinking as you approach a design, and obviously in what we do, we have certain freedom of doing maybe a little more creative work than if you were on just like new design or new construction. But it has changed my perspective on how we design or what I do in my engineering role. How has changed your mindset since you started Mentor Dino, and maybe think about some of the maybe skills that you have gathered during that time.
Yeah, I think it's all about asking questions and pulling the right people together to have a discussion. Um, I Comparing it to what I do on Mentor Dino, I run an ARE series on how people get through the exams, and that's all written. The podcast is all discussion based and almost like a coffee chat. And the amount of involvement and people that can jump at giving me an hour of their time versus filling out a questionnaire. I have a lot more people not filling out the questionnaire because it takes time to write. And so sometimes it's about getting people out of just thinking, okay, I need to go figure out these calculations and just, this is the track I need to go on. And it's about pulling the multiple disciplines together to say, okay, here's the design issue. I've been in construction for the last year and a half. So a lot of the changes are, you have to understand where you are in the process. And there is always if we were in design, this would be the best option. But because of where we're at, we can't do that option. So we have to think creatively. And so it's pulling in the right team of architects and engineers without it being 20 people. Because soon as you start hitting a group over 6, then there's just too many people in the room. You need that nucleus to just have a discussion. And I can ask the engineer questions and be like, all right, how would we do this in this situation? And then be able to just be curious and ask questions. I have gotten better at trying not to ask leading questions, which is also helpful for when I talk to users. I don't want to guide users to their answer. I want to get their honest answer. And I noticed with my podcast, I tend to do that. So listening to myself ask questions, I'm training myself to think simple questions to get more detailed answers, but definitely noticing that just communication and having discussions, whether it be all in person or a mixed virtual in person, just get the right people in the room and discuss it, are the opportunities to make sure you're not by yourself and just, you end down a rabbit hole and it doesn't align with the design intent, or you haven't been on the construction site in a month and you don't realize how far along they are. Um, it's those conversations where it can just be faster to just spitball and get an idea or sketch live just to figure out a solution. So that's something where I've definitely pushed for the quick phone calls. I definitely cold call people in the office. I look to see if that Teams dot is green. And if it's green, sometimes I'll send a note if I see that you're busy with a bunch of meetings that day. But if you're wide open, I'll try to call you just to plow through something rather than sending emails that can be a black hole and people forget. So that's something I've definitely learned over communicating with people in different forms over 2023 and kind of how I've adjusted myself because I'm constantly reflecting on how to be better. But I don't think everybody necessarily does that on a regular basis or takes a step back. Like we all try to step back at the end of the year, which really we should try to take these step backs or notice things. But I don't know if I would have noticed all my leading questions if I didn't start recording me asking questions. So,
Yeah, and I mean, the first few episodes, it's always a little painful to listen back and
yep,
listen through the whole thing. But hey, we all start somewhere, and I think you probably have
exactly.
noticed as you have gone through many episodes, you probably get a little better at that as well. And if you're doing more interviews, it's the first few interviews is always like very choppy, very hard to get the point across. But sometimes it's just that pain, the growth pain at the beginning that can lead to great results. Remind me, are you currently working remote, either full time or part time, if I remember correctly?
I'm working full time and it's a hybrid
Okay.
situation. So kind of, we have our local office. It depends on what's going on.
Yeah,
Um,
because I was
so I would
just
try to go in 1 to 2 days a week. But if I have
yeah.
to travel to my job site, which is in a different state, then sometimes I wouldn't go in at all because it would be like a whole day of travel to get up there, be up there for a day or two, a day or travel back, and then I need days to catch up. And I do notice I can have a little bit better heads down time when at home. So it kind of depends on what I'm doing, what I'm working on, and what's happening that week.
Yeah, I was just thinking that I've been working remote full time for about a year and a half now. Another thing that I can think of, just as I was doing the podcast and reaching out to people that I didn't know in the first few episodes and everything when I was doing interviews, was that kind of shyness of, hey, I'm going to reach out to you, I'm going to jump on a call for 30, 40 minutes, we're going to be talking one on one, and it's going to be challenging. And I think that has already made me more likely to like communicate with my coworkers if I just need to make a call, or if I need to call a
Mhm.
client, or if I need to do things like that. Just doing, like, recording something with someone else, or just having a conversation with someone else that you have never met is, I mean, to me as an engineer, a little scary. I don't know about to you as an architect that maybe are more extroverted, but I think that's another kind of side effect of having something where you're talking to people constantly. I think that has great benefits for our careers.
Yeah, and it may be a generational thing because I
That
have
too.
gotten pulled for my firm on like, hey, why is, the current graduates like not reaching out and asking questions? And we all have our tendencies. Even as a millennial, I'm not one to pick up the phone and call somebody that I have no idea who they are, or even scheduling a doctor's appointment. I'd rather do it online. I have found I'd rather just do it in person. I'll schedule my next appointment year out. I don't care. Just do it while I'm in person. And I even had that issue when I started out in calling product reps because I didn't know them. And then when you come out of school, you feel like you should know everything, but you know nothing. So then it's like, well, I don't want to call this product rep that's, in his, I don't know, 50s and has been in the industry and knows so much. They're just going to say, oh, you're just a silly girl and you don't know anything. Like that persona really hit home when I started. And it wasn't until I started actually going to in-person CSI, or Construction Specifications Institute, events so I could meet people. And I already started to learn that early on. If I have a relationship with somebody and I've talked to them, it's a lot more easy for me to pick up the phone and call them. So I've got my core product reps that I could call for any silly question, or even call them to say, I don't know who to call. Do you know who I need to call to answer? You're not the right person, but you have the connections to know other people. And I think the podcast and reaching out to people that you have no idea who they are and just wanting to talk to them and have a discussion starts to break down those barriers for me. And I think it's more generational, that the more senior generation never had that problem. And I don't really want to say it's a problem, it's a different challenge and understanding. So then when you look cross generations, then people don't understand when other generations have different problem, and it's really the environment and the technology we grew up on. So I think it's more generational, and it's trying to find things to break down those barriers to really help somebody. And so the podcast has really helped me just be able to reach out to anybody in any state doing anything. I know the over a week, I think I'm interviewing 5 people, and none of them are in the same state, and most of them I've never met in person before. So, it's definitely fun, and I do notice, like, hey, this is gonna be, you have your reach people that you send messages to that, "Oh, there's no way they would answer me or, talk to me. My company is still very new, my podcast is very new," and they're ready to jump and help and have a discussion. So it's been fantastic just seeing people in the AEC industry reach back out to have conversations. So hopefully for
Yeah.
anybody younger, push yourself to, you don't have to start a podcast or anything, but reach out to just have conversations with people.
Yeah, and like I was saying before, I think I enjoyed a lot. It's a lot of fun. Obviously, the beginning was a little nerve wracking, but it gives us a, I think to me, just a way to stop thinking about the numbers and engineering and everything, and just kind of gives me a little out where I can be a little more creative and have a little more
Hmm.
independence on what I do. I want to transition into, I think you have, like you were mentioning, a few courses for architects. Do you have any other courses that can help engineers in their careers, architects, young professionals in general? And just to tag to that, what has been kind of your number one, um, not motivation, but the way you have progressed in your career, kind of what has been the number one thing that has given you the most results as you were transition maybe from a younger professional into maybe a little more experienced architect?
Great. Let's see where to start. So I've the courses wise, I have 5 courses currently. I have to like make sure what I have actually launched versus the ones I'm working on. Um, the first ones to get launched, I launched a trio of courses, which I learned I will not launch 3 courses at the same time again. That launched at the end of May last year, and that was all for architects and designers in a trio of courses to build your technical and your professional development skills. It's got a Revit crash course, so any company that uses Revit that the students never used that program before, they can hit the ground running within 3 days and be able to be helpful. Um, the second course is called BIM and it's more about talking about constructability with BIM and modeling because you can kind of put a door anywhere, but how the actual door swing needs to move and ADA clearances and how you physically build a door. They're not really taught all those things. Or drafting conventions. We aren't taught really how to dimension anymore because everything's very abstract and just big picture. And so it's getting those basics down, but the third course of that trio can really go to anybody. When I was building the courses, I was thinking of niching down just to architects, but after doing some conferences and talking to people, I had a lot of engineers reach out to me for the professional development side. So that third course, Build Your Foundation, I'm working on getting some other examples in there that are cross-disciplinary because a lot of my examples are architecture based. So like the goal setting, I use the architecture registration exams as a goal tree, and I may add a small one for the FE and PE as I learn through the processes, just so if there's an engineer taking the course, they could look at the ARES because it's a little bit more involved in terms of multiple exams, but on the engineering side, it's a little bit more involved in the documentation side. So giving them tools to be organized on that sense. So that third course can really go anywhere. And then talking to different firms on just what their needs are created my fourth course, which is the Foundation to Leadership, which is just professional development courses. And that can go architects, designers, engineers. I add sections like how to delegate and how there's actually 7 levels of delegation and how that brings together with trust. So, how you can trust your team to help go up the ladder to be able to delegate at a higher level to save you time. Because if you're not delegating at a higher level and you're delegating at level 0, you're actually not delegating at all. And then you wonder why you haven't saved any time by having a team. So, that one's been fun to create. And I have a few other sections I want to add to it, just to build up some other areas as I've discussed with firms on what other little gaps may be in there. And then the fifth course has been the first job course for architects, because a lot of the times you look at, how to build a resume, what should I put in portfolio, and being more of the creative side of the industry, you don't really want your resume to look like a business MBA resume, and that's all that comes up when you Google resumes. So letting people know what they should really show, what's important. I've been on both sides of the table. I've launched a summer intern program at a firm. I've been to career fairs as a student and as a professional, and just giving people the insights to simplify the process, but also to find a job that aligns with them and they're not just finding a job to be a job. So that was the fifth course. And then created two small digital products. One's with the ARE exams and just compiling all the stories I collected last year, which is all free to anybody studying. So I collected 66 stories last year. And so that went out. And then actually last week, I launched my first book. And that one was for students and parents looking to study architecture. So I started writing it towards the beginning of last year. And it took a while just between keeping up with content and work life balance. But a resource to figure out, what do architects do? How do we coordinate with engineers? What to look for in a school program? Understanding you should go to an accredited school, and how to find out what's accredited. And did a big Q&A at the end, so there's questions that they can ask an architect if they go grab a coffee or job shadow. But then I answered them myself, so at least they have one person that's gone through it. So it's kind of the courses and content I've built on the platform. And then YouTube's just been a fun little, any little discussions. I did a series on what an architect does based on the design phase, which I even created a video on what design phases are. And I had product reps reach out to me saying, thank you. Like, we understanding when to reach out to understand. Like, if somebody says they're in schematic design, I'm not ready to figure out what's going on with the exterior exact material and product. I may be still figuring out with my structural engineer if we're using steel or concrete on the building and how that's coming together. So my focus is over here and not on the products yet. I know you want to be in the specs, and I know I want to go see what products are the latest and greatest and what we want to use, but my head's not there yet. So it's, creating something that I thought would help students, and it's actually helping professionals. So it's fun to see the things you create, who you think it's going to help, and in reality, how many other people it helps. So really the engineers being excited on the professional development side, I had to really reframe my head and just like, okay, I can actually help more people than I thought, or other people were intrigued by it.
Great resources in terms of like the variety. I think that that just shows that as you kind of start developing your skills, maybe outside of work, um, you start seeing and adjusting to the things that are you're getting feedback on. And I think that sometimes we struggle that when we're just focused on, hey, I'm an architect, this is what I'm doing. I'm an engineer, this is what I'm doing. But we're not looking on the side mirrors at like what's in the peripheral view. And I think you have adjusted to that, and you start to see that you start targeting architects, but as soon as you start sharing that information, engineers, maybe contractors, builders start listening and watching all your information, and they will start aligning themselves with, hey, this is what the architect does. This is when I need to reach out. If I need to move this beam, I need to contact the architect. I need to contact this other person. And I think makes the process of design and construction a lot easier. The second part of the question was just on like your like what has in your career or like with through Mentor Dino, what is the one thing that has increased your maybe like confidence level as you are designing and as you are uh, going through your maybe day to day? Like what has been one of the things that could be related to work, could be related to Mentor Dino, but like what is kind of one of your high leverage activities that has make the greatest impact in your career? And while you think about it, I can tell you kind of maybe mine as an example. Uh, I tend to be a little forgetful and a little maybe running through the motions too much. And I think through the podcast, I've learned that a lot of people, and I think that's kind of one of the beauties that I've learned through the podcast is kind of their routines and like what are they doing to really make the most out of their careers. And I think for me, the biggest impact, honestly, like I couldn't go more than 2 or 3 days without doing this in the morning. It's just sitting down for 5 minutes, literally getting a piece of paper, a notepad or something, and start writing down what I need to do for the day. And time blocking, it's a little rigid for me because things come up during the day. But at least having like a plan for the day. Here are the things I need to do. Here's who I need to talk to, and I have it as a little stand here on my desk that I can look at it throughout the day, and I'm aligned with what I need to be doing. And every time I get distracted, every time I maybe get a call and get distracted for a few minutes, I can take a look at that again. Okay, it's 10 a.m. This is what I need to be doing right now. Does it need to change? Do I have the plan ready? So that's kind of something that I started implemented, and I've learned it through the podcast, through other people doing it, other people like journaling, other people like different things. But I'm just kind of curious if you have anything like that that you have seen has made a great impact in your career.
Yeah, so there's probably two things, organization and listening.
Mhm.
Um, I am one that I tend to want to give my opinion, for good or for bad. Um, and so I've learned to sit back more and listen to understand and not listen to respond. Because oftentimes, you know, people will have heated conversations, whether you're in construction or in design, and voices can elevate and people can get stressed. But if you can be the calm person that is not just trying to solve the problem, but get consensus behind it, sometimes you just need to listen to understand, and it's okay to have the pauses, which can be very hard for people in a digital world. There are a lot of professionals that the second you want to pause and think, then they want to fill the space with sound. And so it's
Mhm.
very hard to do that when you're with those professionals. But that's why I tend to leave the camera on. Like you could tell I was thinking, but
Yeah.
if I didn't have my camera on, you wouldn't know I was thinking. It's like, hello, are you muted? What's going on? And
Yeah.
so teaching people those other cues are important, especially if you're not in person with everybody and you're virtual, making sure everybody in the room has their camera on so you can understand when other people are thinking and they can see when you're thinking or you want to say something. It's a little bit easier to speak up at the right time. So that's kind of the listening side. Organizing. I've been a good organizer, but at the same time then, I'll be disorganized. So I kind of have this weird balance, but to work full time alone, you need to be organized because we get so many emails, we're coordinating with so many people, different consultants, who you're talking to, and things can come at you at a moment's notice. So you kind of have to drop and get things done. But then running a podcast, having an ARE story a week, learning video editing. I post content on social media every single day, and I've been posting every day since like June of last year. And it's definitely trying to stay ahead and keeping a list and being organized, like you said, is very important. But understanding that your organization style doesn't have to be the same for everything.
Mhm.
So I have more like, this is my content list. I love printing it out. It's in a calendar form, and I can do just quick notes on where it's at. And I have different checks, meaning if I've created the content, if it's ready for social media, if it's already launched, it's good to go. But then my work calendar, I have it more in a standard book, and I have all the dates on one side and a running list to what's going on. So my head changes based on what I'm doing.
Mhm.
I've also had it change when I had two different projects, and I had a similar calendar track. Like design development went out only a couple weeks separate, and I did a calendar just straight week column in the middle and had the project list on the side so I could keep track on what I was doing, but I could always have those deadlines overlapping at the same time and understanding when somebody else on my team, because it was pretty much architecture and MEP were the same teams on the two projects. So understanding, hey, we need to get all this done so then you have time to work on the other project, or you have a day to just breathe
Yeah.
after a deadline. So having an organizational structure and being okay that it'll change is important, but understanding when things need to give. So all of my Mentor Dino stuff, I'm 4.5 weeks out on content that's already done, scheduled, and I don't have to do anything. So if something happens with work, then I need to work late and I can get that done. Or I had water in the basement last week. Like, okay, guess I'm not doing something. I can run downstairs.
Mhm.
But something I've learned through podcasting is I like um, batch producing. So and I've learned that, and I've taken some of it to the construction side, in architecture. So if I'm doing videos, I'll batch do videos back to back because I'm in a rhythm and I can roll with it. I have realized I can't really do that with podcast recording because I do just get tired from being on camera all the time. But the ARE stories, I'll do 4 of them all at once. So I'm in a sequence. I have a rhythm. They're all edited. Okay, now I do the image and do this, and I can fly a lot faster. And I've done that on the architecture side. Whenever I get different change orders and stuff, you'll get them in heaping emails worth, or you could deal with it with RFIs or submittals, and then blocking out your calendar. So then it looks like you're in a meeting, but it's, hey, I'm going to do all my submittals over these 3 hours. So hopefully you don't get pulled into doing something else, and your head can just be in that state and you're doing the same thing. And you're not trying to jump with different tasks, which is just as disruptive as if somebody calls you. So that's definitely something I've learned over last year, that I love doing things in batches and I can work a lot faster. So I've tried to take that over into the architecture side as much as I can. Like, some things you have to be more creative and abstract and you don't know where something's going to take you. So, but when you can, and I know it works for me, I try to do it. But staying organized is really important in this profession.
Yeah, and that's kind of the beauty of just doing something or even talking with people outside your industry. It just gives you those kind of hints and clues of, hey, this is how they do their work, and this is how we're doing it. Like, I think the batching, it's a great idea as well. And I don't know if that's, I wouldn't say it's very common in engineering or architecture, but it makes a lot of sense when you're dealing with little, maybe change orders or RFIs, or you're writing proposal. You can tackle 10 in a row instead of having one every other day, and it's going to distract you from what you're doing. Having kind of similar types of like activity, especially if you're a manager, you have a lot of different responsibilities that are not always, as a design engineer, you can run calculations all day, and that's basically all you're doing. But as a project manager, maybe you are doing invoices, you are approving timesheets, you are planning for the week ahead. You're doing all these different things that require different skills as you go through them. If you try to consolidate them into little pockets of time, it's going to be a lot easier to manage them than if you are trying to do one, uh, approving timesheets, then planning for the week, then writing a proposal. It's going to be taxing, transferring your mental load from each of these activities, and it's going to be a lot easier if you do them kind of all together.
Yeah, and another example I give, because I'm pretty much a PA PM, so I'm doing kind of design, keep up with the client, what's going on with change orders. And I find you need to learn about yourself and when you work best. I am more of a morning person. So I am more on the engineering schedule, that I am starting at 7:30 in the morning, and a lot of architects aren't rolling in till 9. And like I said earlier in the podcast, I'm not a strong reader or writer. So it takes me a lot longer to read through emails. I will edit my emails a bunch of times to make sure they're appropriate. And so that reading and writing time, I tend to do in the morning. So if I need to go through RFIs or submittals, a lot things that are more paperwork heavy, I'd rather do that in the morning because I've got my cup of coffee. I am aligned. I tend to not let contractors know I start that early. I won't email them till at least 8:30. And then the engineers will slowly figure out because I'll email them back. But that's my like focus time that not a lot of people are working. Or even if I do go in the office, it's still usually an hour of quiet time that I can focus. So it may not be perfectly batching as like what I do with Mentor Dino, but it's still a chunk of time where I'm focusing what type of task I'm doing. And then I tend to hit a wall at like 2:30, 3 o'clock in the afternoon, where I start slowing down if I'm not having the coffee, or if I'm still doing paperwork, it's a drag. But that's when the creative side, if I can do tasks like that in the afternoon, I can be a lot more energized. And those tasks can energize me as much as if I had another cup of coffee. So understanding what can really drag and slow you down, and putting that in a time that you're most productive. If rendering, you hate rendering, maybe do that in the morning. Or different things like that depending on your workday. And it's really up to the individual that works. And sometimes you can try to schedule it around your meetings too. So if you're in meetings all afternoon, what do you need done that morning? And not waiting to finish everything that morning for what you need the afternoon. I know I get stressed working towards like those crunch deadlines. So I'd rather be done a day before. And so I try to tell my teams that because I know my stress level will go up and then I get shorter with people and my temper gets shorter. So when I work with somebody new, I just say, hey, I'm a planner and an organizer. I want things done the day before, or if a deadline's going out. Sorry, engineers, I want your sheets and your schedules all done the week before. And you may still work on it and edit, but if I can at least get the sheet index done and make sure you've got all your sheets covered, then you can have a couple more days to fix and finalize. But just letting people know that I don't want to be working till 10 o'clock at night the day of the deadline, find out you're missing a drawing sheet, you're a consultant, so I don't have access to your model or something and I can't go print it for you. Like, I don't want to call you at 10 o'clock at night. So I'm like, let's keep it to work day hour tasks. And if you can plan ahead and just let people know the plan, then they're usually amendable to it. But it's definitely learning about yourself whenever you're organizing your day and what works for you.
Yeah, and I think that that's an important point as well. Just kind of knowing and understanding if you're a morning person, an evening person, but not only that, but what type of tasks are better suited for the morning. I know for me, the task in the morning where I need to just get into a design and start designing and plow through it without really thinking too much on basically like any creative items that may go along with that. I tend to sometimes leave those for the end of the day, or sometimes even when I'm putting the kids to bed and I wind down and I'm a little more relaxed, ideas come to me because I'm always kind of thinking about those things. There's a lot of research that it may seem counterintuitive, but a lot of the creative thinking it's better suited for the evenings and night when you're kind of winding down and at the end of the day. And more of the critical and deep thoughts that need to happen in terms of, hey, I need to get into design, I need to kind of plow through it. Um, they're better suited for the morning when you're fresh and everything. For example, for me, like I love doing AutoCAD late at night. I don't know what it is, but just kind of having um, I don't know if it's like darkness and you're kind of in the flow in terms of like you're just kind of figuring these little things out. It's a little more creative than if I were to just be designing um, something for one of the projects. I think it's something that may not be intuitive, but as you start playing with it, you can start figuring out when kind of those admin tasks are better suited maybe towards the end of the day. But if it's going to be require a lot of your mental load, a lot of like thinking, it may be suited for the morning. Same with design. I think there's a lot of different things you can play with as you are planning your day, or even like more intentionally thinking about how to structure your day that has a lot of influence on that.
Yeah, like I know I've got like a notepad on my phone and I also have post-it notes like all over my house. So I don't know if it's because I like doing workshops and different abstract things, but my husband always jokes because I got post-it notes all over the house. But I also have like a whole notepad on my phone that it's just like, when I get an idea, I may be at the grocery store or out and about, and I don't need to jump online, but I need to write it down or else I'm going to forget about it. So you never know when like creative inspiration is going to hit you, or if you're talking to somebody and they've got a great idea, like my book. I wasn't anticipating on writing a book, but after I gave a conference presentation on retention and onboarding talent, they're like, you need to write a book for students because, they've got kids looking to go to college and they're on different channels and seeing people have questions on what architect does do. And it's like, oh, okay, I can create that. So it's like I pulled out like my phone. It was just writing down the conversation and she was telling me things to do. So it's just like, you never know who you're going to talk to that moment to inspire you or give you an idea, or if you need a creative solution, maybe you stumble upon it somewhere else.
Yeah, absolutely. And we kind of get in here towards the end, but I really appreciate all of your insights, knowledge, and everything. Do you have anything else kind of you want to leave us with that you can think of that can help other engineers or young professionals?
Some great advice that I have experienced and also learned from others through conversations um, is be patient and understand where you are. So I've mentioned early in my career, I felt like I should have already known everything because I had an architecture degree, or after I got licensed, thought I should know everything, and nobody will ever know everything. So, making sure you understand kind of where you are in the present moment in your development and focus on learning and retaining as much as you can, but making sure that you can find a work environment that you feel safe to acknowledge when you have failed at something or ask for help, um, and making sure that you can pivot at a moment's notice, or if you hit a trouble spot, knowing when to ask for help is important, because there's a lot of the times you don't know what you don't know. And the more you can catch when you're starting to stumble down that block, to step back and go find somebody that may have the answers, or they may know somebody else that would have the answers. But don't try to just work in your own silo to feel like you have to prove yourself. If you feel like you're in that type of environment, that's not good for a young professional. You should be asking so many questions and be curious and make sure you're thorough to learn to make sure that you're building yourself along the way. Because if you start to skip any steps or really, really fake it, then you're not really learning how to do it right. And then a couple years down the line, you're going to be like, oh crap, like I don't actually know how to do that. And so, and you don't want to feel bad then either and feel like you have egg on your face. So it's when you build those best practices starting out. I'm very amendable if a young professional asks me a question on a detail and I haven't done that for a while, or I need to check in with somebody. I am very upfront with them to, hey, I think we have to do A, B, and C, but I want to check on another drawing set because I haven't done that in a couple years, or I want to double check with this person to make sure I get you going in the right direction, just so they can see even 10 years into my career, I still have questions and I don't remember what I did necessarily 6 years ago. And I may have learned something from that anyway to make sure I did it right. So be patient, take your time, ask questions, be curious.
Yeah, that's some
So
great advice there. I like to end the podcast usually on a question that I've asked everyone, and I asked myself before too. But how can we continue engineering our future? And as you think about that, I think what I mean by engineering our future is we typically record with younger engineers, maybe little experienced engineers, and I think we're all trying to elevate ourselves to a level of greatness, helping society with our work. We'll work for at least engineers for the benefit and for the well-being of society. Architects, their design challenges and everything. In your perspective, how can we continue engineering our future in terms of what we need to do to continue progressing in our careers?
I would say be open to listening to others inside and outside of your discipline. Um, as much as I am an architect, I would love to teach professional development to architects, engineers, designers, contractors, and even other professions outside the AEC industry. We're a problem solving industry, and we can really expand what we do outside of any particular discipline. So, if there's something you're passionate about, try to get involved in something that is beyond just an engineering organization or beyond an architectural organization. I always look for ones that collaborate with all of the AEC, or pulling me into a community where they may not experience engineers and architects, but I may be with lawyers and businessmen and other people that have such a different frame of mind that it gets me to continue to think outside the box. So be looking internally to help build your skill set, but don't be afraid to look externally outside your discipline to create the future that you want the profession to go, or what you want to do with your career.
Absolutely. Thank you so much for your time. We'll be linking your website, podcasts, everything in the show notes below. But it was a pleasure talking to you.
Yeah, thank you so much, Luis.
If you really enjoyed this episode of the Engineering Future Podcast, you're gonna love the content we have over our website at luisfelipeduque.com. You can find the link in the description of this episode, as well as the show notes at luisfelipeduque.com. luisfelipe.com/podcast. Every episode comes packed a lot of links, a lot of information. So you can find all the show notes and all the information related to this episode over at luisfelipeduque.com/podcast. Thank you so much for coming back to this episode. Thank you, Jack Winters, for the music. And as always, let's continue engineering our future.